Let's make some granular style soundscapes using Vital. You can download these presets and more in my preset pack called Ear Candy. Ear Candy is a collection of 120 soundscapes, transitions, sequences, swells, and stabs that are all easily edited and easily searched. I made them easy to search by including the function and the character of the preset in the title. For example, all these presets are labeled Soundscape. The character is labeled at the beginning of the preset name using the Japanese elements: earth, wind, fire, metal, void, in addition to water. For example, this preset sounds metallic, while the granular seascape I played earlier has an underwater sound. Now, before I jump into a step-by-step tutorial, I'm going to do a high-level analysis of these presets and show you what they all have in common. So the goal here was to emulate sort of a granular sound by having these three oscillators play random notes at random times. And they also have random panning, and sometimes in these presets, random amplitudes. So in order to accomplish that, I'm using LFOs 1 through 3 to control the amplitude of oscillators 1 through 3. And it's using this shape here. The frequency of these LFOs is being randomized by these random LFOs here, and those random LFOs are also randomizing the coarse pitch. Now, I'm using the transpose snap to lock in the coarse pitch to the nearest of these three notes. So if I'm playing, for example, an A flat, it'll choose between A flat, B flat, and E flat, because remember, this transposes. The reason I chose those three notes is because those are the most neutral sounding notes. Both major and minor scales have those notes in common. After that, I also use these macros to make this preset really flexible. So macro 1 is controlling the rate, so I could get a really slow thing, or I could have it sound extremely fast here, to the point where there's almost no discernible pitch. Now, I also have this amp shape thing here, and this is really cool. So basically, this is controlling the shape of this amplitude envelope here. Now with macro 3 on this preset, it's controlling timbre. So in this case, the frame of the wavetable. And then for macro 4, each one of these presets has a range macro. So this is controlling how much the random LFOs are controlling coarse pitch. So with a maximum of 48, that's 4 octaves. I have this set to 50%, so it's 2 octaves. So basically, every time this oscillator is playing a note, it's going to be choosing between 6 notes, these 3 notes, and then the 3 notes an octave above that. Now let's take a quick look at the effects. So basically I have a delay here. This is common in all these presets to give it, make it sound like there's even more random notes playing. I kept it pretty long because I didn't want there to be any kind of discernible repeating rhythm, or at least a consistent rhythm. So I set this to 0.5 and this to 0.38, which are relatively unrelated, so there wouldn't be that audible relationship like 2/3 or 2/4 or something like that. And then this equalizer I think is unique to this specific preset, but all of them also have a reverb. Since this is sort of an atmospheric effect, it helps give it some space and atmosphere here. So I have a pretty long time, 3 seconds. I decreased the size to make it more dense, gave it some chorus, and it's fairly hot in the mix with 25% there. And the delay is very hot in the mix, it's at 50%. To get started, initialize preset. It doesn't really matter which waveform you choose for this one, but for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to use the sine wave from Basic Shapes. This is more of a tutorial on how to create a granular style template that you could use for any waveform. So anyways, now that I've done that, I'm going to turn the level all the way down, and then I'm going to control that level with LFO 1. I'm going to change the shape by dragging this over so it's sort of a swell, and I get this. So I'm going to change the unit to seconds, and I'm arbitrarily going to choose 1 second. It doesn't matter too much because we're going to be controlling the frequency of all these LFOs with a macro later. Now what I want to do is I want this to play at random times. So I'm going to randomize this frequency by using random LFO1. So I'm going to set random 1 to sample and hold, and then I'm going to set the frequency to 1 second. So basically, every second I get a new value from this random LFO here. So I'm going to drag this over to the frequency of LFO1, and I'm going to reduce this modulation amount to 0.05. So it's pretty subtle, but it's going to be a lot more noticeable when we stack 3 oscillators on top of each other. So now that I've done that, I want to use another random LFO, and I'm going to use this LFO to modulate coarse pitch. So I'm going to set this to sample and hold 1 second again, and I'm going to drag that over to coarse pitch. Now I want this frequency to match the frequency of LFO1 because I don't want it to transpose until this amplitude shape is finished. So what I'm going to do is have the random 1 modulate the frequency of random 2 by the same amount I'm modulating the frequency of LFO1. So in order to do that, I have to go to matrix, and then I have to go to random 1 for the source, and then for the destination, go to randoms, and then random 2 frequency. Now that I've done that, I can match that other modulation amount with 0.05. Now, it's completely atonal right now. It's just randomly transposing. So I want to lock it in with the transpose snap. So I'm going to choose the notes C, D, and G. And the reason I'm choosing these notes is because they're the most consonant notes. They'll work over both major and minor scales. So it's going to always snap to the nearest of these 3 notes. That'll prevent the different notes from different oscillators clashing with one another. So now that I've done that, I'm going to use random 2 to randomize some more stuff. Now I have to be careful because it's randomizing pitch, and so if I have low notes, I'll demonstrate in a second. Let's hold this. Let's hold Shift and drag this over to panning, and then let's reduce that modulation amount to 1. So what I was going to say earlier is that since this is controlling the transpose, if it's also controlling panning, well, now low notes are going to be panned left and high notes are going to be panned right. So I'm going to have to reverse that when I do this in oscillator 2 later on. The same thing applies to what I'm going to do next. So I'm going to drag this over to LFO1 to this modulation amount. Remember, this is modulating the level of oscillator 1. So this is how I can get some random amplitudes. Now, I don't want it to be anywhere from 0 to 100. I still want to be able to hear every note, so I only have 3 oscillators. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to that modulation I just made, so random 2 to modulation 1 amount, and I'm going to set a floor here. It's only going to go from 50% to 100, and that'll prevent there from being any inaudible notes down here. And the notes down here are still pretty quiet. So once again, I need to remember to reverse that when I do this for another oscillator so that low notes aren't always quiet. So now that I've done that, let's repeat the steps for oscillator 2. I'm going to make this a sine wave. For oscillator 2, I'm going to use LFO2, same shape. But for this time, I'm going to set this to 1.5 seconds, just so it's at a different starting point. So I'm going to drag this over to, not coarse pitch, I'm going to drag this over to level, but I got to turn down level first. And then I'm going to use random 3 to randomize that frequency. I'm going to set random 3 to 1.5 seconds, drag that over, reduce that modulation amount once again to 0.05. Then I'm going to use random 4 at sample and hold 1.5 seconds. And this is going to control coarse pitch of oscillator 2. Then I need to go to the matrix because I need random 3 to also be randomizing the frequency of random 4. So random 3 for the source, and then random's random 4 frequency. Once I've done that, I got to right click on that modulation amount and set it to 0.05 again. So now that I've done that, I'm going to repeat these steps I did here with the panning and the amount, but I'm going to reverse them. So I'm going to hold shift and drag this over to the panning of oscillator 2. I'm going to reduce that down to 1. I'm going to go to the matrix, and where I have random 4 modulating oscillator 2 pan, I'm going to reverse this. So if I go saw down, now lower notes will be panned to the right, whereas in oscillator 1, lower notes are panned to the left, so it should balance out. Then I'm going to drag over random 4 to LFO2's modulation amount. Remember, this is modulation for oscillator 2's level. And then, let's see, I'll go to this. This is random 4 modulating this amount here. And I have to do two things now. So I got to reverse it by going saw down. And then I want to prevent there from being inaudible notes. I'm going to raise the floor here to 50%. So now let's hear that. Let's make sure I did this right. I'm going to turn off oscillator 1 so I can just hear oscillator 2. So I can hear that I did the reversing right. Low notes are in the right channel and they're louder. So now let's pair it with oscillator 1 and hear them together. And that sounds very random to me. I'm also going to just offset these slightly, the tuning of them, in case they're playing the same note. I still want it to sound like two different oscillators. So now that I've done that, I'm going to add in oscillator 3. Now, this is going to be different than oscillators 1 and 2, mostly because I ran out of random oscillators. And, there's probably a workaround, but it doesn't really matter because what I'm going to do is have oscillator 3 just playing a consistent rhythm. And since there are two other oscillators playing really random rhythms, you're not going to hear that consistent rhythm playing. It's just going to be part of the mess. So let's use LFO3. And let's repeat the same steps from before. I'm going to use 1.5 for the seconds here, and then turn volume down, drag that over. Now I need a random LFO that's always at 1.5 seconds. So that would be random 3, because remember, random 4, its frequency is being randomized. So if I use random 3, I can control coarse pitch here. And then I can also control the panning. I'm going to reduce that to 1. And now let's go to the matrix for this one. Oscillator 3 pan, and this time I'm going to make it a triangle. So it's kind of splitting the difference there. And then one more thing, let's have this modulate this modulation amount. Remember, this is amplitude. So once again, I'm going to make a triangle for this one, and I'm going to raise the floor. Now let's hear just oscillator 3 by itself to make sure I did this right. I forgot to do the transpose snap, C, D, G, and I need to do it here too. So now let's hear them all together. Sounds very random, and it doesn't sound very good yet, but hang in there. There's some cool things we can do to make this sound a lot better. So one thing I want to do is I want to speed this way up. So I'm going to use macro 1 in order to control the rates of every single one of these LFOs. And I need to make that modulation amount the same for each one. So I'm going to hold shift, and I'm going to drag this over to each one of these LFOs frequencies. So I'm going to click LFO1, do it there, Click LFO2, do it there. LFO3. And then for these randoms as well, I'm going to control them. Because remember, they need to match the LFOs above. They need to match their frequency, or at least half of them do. So now I have these 7 modulation amounts. Now, in Vital, it has its quirks. I think if you click on this when you have several modulations and you try to right-click and then enter the value, that value never goes away. So one way to get around that is by holding Alt. It's kind of a handy trick anyways. Now I can just type in the values for each one of these. And I'm going to make them all 0.8. Now, since this is bipolar, if I set this to 0.5, I should be back at the 1 second I set these to. And if I turn it up, it'll be a lot faster. So I'm going to label this rate. And then with macro 2, we're going to do something really cool here. So if I go to matrix and I sort by source and I find LFOs 1 through 3, I can control the shape of these amplitude envelopes. So if I drag this over to the morph of all 3 of those, and by default it's a positive value, which is going to make it go like this. So I want to set it to the negative value. So I'm going to set these from 10, all of them from 10 to negative 10. And you can set the range to negative 20 if you want, but especially at a fast tempo, negative 10 is pretty extreme, and I'll show you. So basically, it's like doing this. So let's call this amp shape. So now that I've done that, I'm going to use another macro to control the range. So my maximum here is 48 semitones. You could go more if you wanted. I found 48 was pretty big. So I'm going to drag macro 3 over to wherever I have these randoms controlling coarse pitch. So right there. I got to click in here to figure out which one it is. So it's the middle of these 3 for me. And then in random 4, oscillator 2 transpose right there. So now at 0, they're all going to play the same note. They're just going to play whatever note I'm playing, which can kind of be a cool sound, but especially if you crank up the rate here. I mean, you can create some pretty cool effects with this. But I think for most of these, I had it like at 50%. So it's basically doing 2 octaves. So it's choosing among 6 different notes. Oh, that's really fast. So let's label this range. And now that we have all this in place, let's go to the effects. So every one of these has a delay. It's just going to add more busyness, more randomness, more chaos to this sound, and also create more of a space, more dimension. So I used mid ping pong so that I could get some more stereo imaging as well. And I believe I set this to somewhere around 0.5, and then this one in seconds as well, to something unrelated. So 0.38, something like that. Because once again, I don't want there to be like a relationship between these frequencies. Like I don't want it to be 2 to 3 or 2 to 1 or whatever. I have it pretty heavy in the mix at 50%. So it's not louder than the dry signal, but just as loud. Kept feedback where it was, kept spread where it was, and we get this. Another thing I kind of want to do is just add in an attack here, make this more of a swell. That just helps it sound a little bit more natural. And then let's add in a reverb. So I want this to be very atmospheric. If I'm using this in a song, it's probably going to be pretty heavy in the background. Not heavy, but very distant in the background. So I used a long reverb time, in my opinion. Most of my reverbs are short because I don't want to clutter my mix. 3 seconds is about as long as I go. Then I decrease the size to 30%. That makes it more dense. I added in some chorus. That's nice for some atmospheric effects. And then the rest of it should be fine. So that's pretty close to the Granular Seascape preset that I made. I also, for that one, added in chorus. Let's hear that. And that just sounds so cool to me. I remember before I knew sound design, I would frequently be looking for sounds like this, and I just never found them. I would be doom scrolling through really cool presets in Omnisphere, but nothing really fit the bill, especially because a lot of them would be using harmonies that wouldn't fit in my production. So I really like the ability to just choose these harmonies here and to be able to choose harmonies that aren't going to clash. Now, if you want to move this in some different directions, you can use obviously different waveforms, but you also don't have to have this be a swell. You could have it be like a pluck. Oh, I need to do it to every one of these. So for a lot of these, I used sort of glassy sounds or metallic sounds, wavetables that I had created. And you can go crazy with this. You can use these random LFOs to randomize the frame. If you have a good wavetable, like kind of a glassy or metallic thing. And you can use macro 4 to control that modulation amount. So I left macro 4 empty here because you could use that for your specific preset. Like if I was doing a Granular Seascapes, maybe I'd map macro 4 to the chorus mix or something like that. I could also, set this to saw wave. And then turn on the low pass. So if I turn that all the way down, I'm basically back to a sine wave. Turn that off, bring this back. And then let's control low pass with macro 4. So there are all sorts of possibilities with this preset. You can fiddle with the rate to get some pretty wild sounds. And you can have, you can create a lot of really cool sounds, basically. So I hope you found that helpful. Thank you for watching the video.